Hi, I'm Jerry Lawler. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about how Lansing got its name, and then look at John Lansing and determine if that was a proper name to name the capital, figure out who he was and what happened to him. Let's start with, in the 1835, in the first constitutional convention of the state, they decided that they weren't ready to name the permanent capital. So basically they decided they would wait 12 years before they would select the site of the permanent capital for the state. And that was, most of the population was concentrated around down Detroit, Southern. They thought in 12 years it'd be more dispersed around and have a better idea where to put it. In 1847, when it rolled around, of course, every burg in the state wanted to be the capital. And bitter battle, we're not going to get into that, but basically they finally ended up selecting Lansing Township, someplace in Lansing Township, named 3 commissioners to come up here and designate the spot, and the senior commissioner was to oversee building the temporary capital. After they had done that, their next job was to name it. And the way they could name it, since it was a creation of the state, they had to get a bill in identical form passed through the House and the Senate, or Senate and House, and then signed by the governor. So all you had to do to name the capital. The capital battle, again, lasted 2 years. They did it in 47, then they came back and rebattled it out in 48. And basically, the names that were suggested, and there was about approximately 50, fell into 3 categories. One, those were suggested purely as a joke. Those that were a derivative of Native American names, or were Native American names. Then those that were named after heroes, basically. The first one that they suggested was Holton. And this was after Doug Holton, and he was 19. He started practicing medicine, was authorized to practice medicine. He came to Michigan. He was mayor of Detroit. He also was a geologist, and he basically did the geological survey of the state. When 1845, he was being touted to run for governor as a Democrat, and he was trying to finish up the geological survey, and he was up in Lake Superior in October, got caught out on the lake, boat got swamped, he drowned. They didn't find the body till the next spring, then they brought it down to Detroit and basically had a state funeral for him. The state basically went into Holton mania. They named the county after him, they named the lake after him, decided they weren't going to name the capital. They already had a couple honors. The next one out was Polk, after the sitting president. He was the Manifest Destiny president. Texas came in, California, New Mexico, Arizona all came in, ran the parallel, basically considered it, rejected it. But the next 5 names they suggested were jokes. The first one was Michigan Flats. You didn't like that one? How about Atsealand? Okay. And my favorite, Frogville. Can you imagine Mayor Hollister? Hi, Mayor Hollister. How about building your plant in Frogville? Come on over. And this goes back to the debate over the capital. Those who opposed selection of Lansing Township portrayed it as the worst place on earth. In fact, the Free Press noted that it was one of the worst places in the state on which to locate the capital. The Oakland Gazette noted the capital is located on the bank of the Grand River in a wilderness of tall timber amid a legion of mosquitoes and all manner of creeping things. And there were several comments to that effect, and there was some truth in it. Basically what was Rudder Park was basically a pond of stagnant water. Where the school administration building is now, that was a huge frog pond. It took 6,000 cubic yards of dirt to fill. Where Lansing Community College is, basically from Ionia north to Saginaw and beyond, was a big swamp or wetlands. The state eventually had to dig a ditch and clear it. And so there was lots of frogs and whatnot. So, but Frogville went down. The next 2 that were suggested was Bush Ridge and True Bush. And very simple reason why. Basically, Charles P. Bush, who had a lot to do with the city after it was designated the capital, he was a big landowner in Livingston County, owned just under about 2,000 acres, and he, right on the Grand River Road, some of it, and he was the president pro tem of the Senate in 47. I mean, he ran the Senate. And he, by all accounts, was the one that engineered Lansing Township becoming the capital. Staged all kinds of things. There's Upton, who was originally from DeWitt, a representative, room with him. He wrote some rather detailed accounts of the strategy Bush used to get this capital located here. A different story, don't have time to go into it. Basically what they were doing is basically honoring him and saying the capital was through Bush, let's name it that. That went down. The next one out was Harrison. William Henry, the hero of the War of 1812, who Harrison County is after. He was elected in President in 1840, basically caught a cold at his inaugural, died 1 month later. But he was a Whig, so he went down, so if you can't elect a name it after a Whig, how about a Democrat? So the next one out was Kinderhook. And Kinderhook basically was Van Buren's nickname. Kinderhook means children's corner. When Henry Hudson was coming up, it's now the Hudson River, exploring it, came around a bend, and there's a group of Native American children playing on the bank, so he named the area Kinderhook. And that's where Van Buren was born and raised. And he was the sitting president. In 1840, his campaign slogan was Old Kinderhook. And there were OK clubs formed, where we get OK from. That everything was fine, this is the way it was, let's re-elect him. Well, things weren't okay because he got defeated. But he went down. When they tried to name the capital, as I mentioned, every burg wanted to be the capital. And the rationale for that was the streets were going to be paved with gold. The riches were going to flow into the capital. You know, it was going to get developed. People were going to make lots of money. And we know that's true, right? Being here. But the next name they suggested was El Dorado, place of wealth. You know, why not? That went down. The next one out was Lansing, not seriously considered. And basically this had come from the Norse, who we know. Basically the Norse started coming in to Lansing Township in 1836, before the county was organized, before the county had government. In 1841, people kept coming in, and there was a meeting held in December 41 in one of the Norse houses, and they suggested wrote a petition to the legislature saying it was time that this township had a name, that it just couldn't go by the range and town number anymore. And they suggested Lansing after Lansing Township, New York, where they'd come from. It also recommended the township adjoining be called Genoa, again after township in New York. Legislature in 1842 said, yep, fine, we'll name it Lansing Township. We already had a Genoa Township in Livingston County, so they named that Delhi. So that was where the name came from. Legislature did not seriously consider it at the time. The first name to be seriously considered was Alida. And this was a name developed by Henry Schoolcraft, who was an Indian agent, worked with caste in extinguishing a lot of the Native American claims to what became Michigan. Served in various portions of the government, married to a Native American, but he collected Native American language, grammar, developed grammar. Then he took sections of different Native American names and made new names. And this is what he did with Alida, which he said meant heart of the country. So, at Alida, Michigan, Alida, the capital of Michigan. The House passed it. When the bill went over to the Senate immediately said no. And they immediately considered Lansing again. It didn't take long, didn't even vote on it, turned that down. Then they went to Franklin. And you got to remember, we're not too far from the Revolutionary War here. I mean, these things are still very much in your mind. Franklin, Washington were basically revered, very much revered. So Franklin went down. How about Fulton? Most of the people that came into the state, including us, a lot of people came to the Lansing area, basically came here after the Erie Canal was opened up, 1825. The radio started in they opened up the fall of 25, but people really didn't start using it to 26. And Michigan was late coming into the Union, because people didn't come here. And but Toledo, there's a big black swamp around it, so not too many came around. But most people did was hopped on, come down the Erie Canal, hopped on a steamship at Buffalo, then come over to Detroit or southeast Michigan, then come up the territorial roads or the northern roads or the railroads or whatever. So they're basically surrounding Fulton for his role he played. Turned him down. Next one out was Lewis Cass. Cass, who was territorial governor, basically did a lot to turn the image of the state around and encourage development in here. Was a sitting senator for Michigan at the time, getting ready to run for president. And so why not name it after Cass? And I turned that down, then went to Washington briefly, turned that down, but when they platted the city, the first two streets they matted out was Capital, Michigan. The third was Washington. The center of the city where they buried the stone from which all measurements were to be made from in Lansing was done on Washington Capitol. So they very much honored him, but they protected his name. The next one out was Tyler. Okay, he was the vice president, was Harrison, became president. Well, he ran into a little trouble. Again, we're not going to get into it tonight, but Jackson went after the National Bank, the U.S. Bank, which is a quasi-public institution. Jackson determined it was ultimately evil. All banks were evil. Do away with it. They were monopolies. Did away with them. Basically put the economy back into a barter system. The Whigs pledged they got in. They were going to recreate the U.S. Bank. Well, the Whigs got control. The first bill went through the Congress establishing the bank. Tyler vetoed it. So they tried to meet his objections, put the second bill through. Tyler vetoed it. His whole cabinet, except Daniel Webster, who was the Secretary of State, resigned. The Whig papers denounced him. He was drummed out of his own party how he was sitting as president. Okay? Tylerism was equated with traitor. He was called our Benedict Arnold. So Tyler, we would have had a capital named after a political traitor. So that went down. The next one was Wright. I have no idea what Wright, any connection with Wright. There's no legislator. I have no idea why they considered Wright. The next one was Lafayette, the Revolutionary War hero. And he basically was orphaned at 13, married at 16, served as a page with the Queen of France. When the Revolutionary War started, came to the United States, joined the Army under two conditions. One, that he would always be treated as a volunteer, could leave anytime he wanted to. One, that he would never be compensated. He spent a lot of his own fortune in the war, was wounded, and there was a portrait acquired by the state in 1840, which was hanging in the Capitol, Detroit Capitol at this time. That same portrait is currently hanging in our Senate chamber, the same portrait. So they're trying to honor him, but they turned it down. Then the Senate considered Michigan, and they passed it. Michigan. Went over to the other house. They said, no, let's go Huron. So you'd have Lake Michigan, Michigan the state, Huron the capital, Lake Huron on the east. So they considered it, toyed with it, rejected it. Next one was a joke. There's a very prominent politician, Labius Littlejohn, wrote some excellent books about the Northwest Territory and whatnot. Seymour knew, in fact, he sold land for Seymour in other counties. And they rejected the sword of Rome or Sylvius. The next one was Swedenborg. And this was, he was basically a Christian mystic, theologian, and believed he could prove the existence of afterlife by using scientific principles. And basically it sort of swept the country. In fact, the 1840s are called the age of the Swedenborg. And a lot of prominent Michigan politicians were members. Lucius Lyon, John Allen, the founder of Ann Arbor, who also loaned land on the east side of Lansing. The state treasurer, the state auditor, Bush, we talked about earlier, was a prominent member, as was Mr. Silver, who was the land commissioner and actually came in and laid out the first town on this site for the state. So it was basically a state religion. The spiritualist movement that ended up out in Lake Lansing in the 50s basically started during this period, the spiritualist movement. But they rejected that and then went to Michigan. So at the end of 1847, we had Michigan as the capital. Nobody liked it. The joke going around is, particularly in Detroit, is they moved the capital from Detroit to Michigan, indicating that Detroit was not part of Michigan. Rivalry. The Free Press sent a reporter up here, got within 10 miles of the site and asked where Michigan was. Nobody knew where it was. But they asked him where was Lansing, the capital, and they pointed him out right away. So the press, there were several press saying, we got to change it. We got to do something. So in 1848, they came here. The first name out, first bill in the Senate, was Algoma. And this was another Schoolcraft name. And supposedly Al meant people on the opposite shore, Goma meant sea. And the idea was that he originally proposed this for Lake Superior, and it was rejected. He never named Lake Superior, Algoma. But there is a region of Canada named this. There's a township in Kent County that was named this. There were several steamboats, one in the Grand River that fly from Grand Rapids to the mouth. And later, a steamship up in, fly the upper Great Lakes was called the Algoma. That was down. The next one, seriously considered, Okemah, okay, actually passed the House, and you got to remember at this time, Okemos did not exist as Okemos. It was first Stanford, and then it was Hamilton. Now, Chief Okemos was in Lansing in 1847. There's several accounts, one by Mr. Potter, whose young boy came in. He didn't have any shoes. He came in from Potterville, the Potterville area, the same Potter family, basically. And Okemos took him to his camp and had moccasins made for him. Then later in the fall, he came in and he took him, showed him how they hunted deer in the Grand River. So Okemos was basically here. Okemos passed and was sent over to the House. And the Senate stuck with the Okemah House was saying Lansing, and they went back and forth all through January. Could not agree. And finally, the Senate says, okay, we're not going with Lansing. How about Begonawanawink? Okay? And a very simple story. There was a township in Genesee County named this. And there was a bunch of Scotsmen had moved in, and they were trying to get the legislature to change the name. And the bills were going through at the same time. The bill to change the name of Michigan, and then change the name Begonawanawink. And they did get changed. It's now Montrose. Much better sounding name. But they rejected it for the capital. The next one suggested was Glenn. And this was after James Glenn. And he was the commissioner, the chief commissioner that came in to cite the capital. And he was the one that was charged with building the temporary capital. So Glen Island in the Grand River down here across from Olds and Morse Park, Double Island, that is Glen Island. And that's named after James Glen. But they rejected the capital. Senate then again pushed Lewis Cass, because he was running for president at the time. He was eventually defeated because Van Buren went on the Free Soil Party ticket. Cass changed his position on abolition. He was totally opposed to it, but to try and get the southern votes, he sort of waffled. But he may not be open to it, which lost some of the northern Democrats, so he basically was defeated. Was reappointed to the Senate the next year for Michigan. The next one out was again a joke, N.B. Eldridge. Now Eldridge had suggested several, Swedenborgian, he had suggested Tyler, several other joke names, so basically they were getting back at him. They went to the conference committee again. The Senate basically ended up trying to come up with a name the House would buy, couldn't agree, went to conference committee, all they could do was disagree. The House at this time was sticking with Lansing, wouldn't accept anything else. They were going to stick with Lansing. The Senate again, after conference committee, tried another LaSalle, finally ended up with Franklin, thought that was their best shot. They passed a bill, the Senate bill naming the capital Franklin. Went to another conference committee, and they come out and they said, let's try Algoma again. We won't accept Lansing, we won't accept Franklin. Let's come out and try to bring out Algoma again. House immediately rejected it, 9-36. Just whacked it down. The Free Press at the time didn't know where it was going. They come out, and one of their editorials says, in our opinion, is that Lansing will eventually be adopted, but we confess we don't like it. Okay, that was a Free Press. The other one, they come out as January dragged on. They'd gone from January to April. They just kept fighting over Okemo, Franklin, or Lansing. House just stayed with Lansing during this period. Finally, the Free Press come out at the end of January and said, we don't think they're going to change the name. It is my feeling that the whole matter will fall through, and our young Michigan Junior, which the capital was known at, will have to continue to make a shift with that name. It has already got. Well, God bless the little darling anyhow. So eventually the Senate backed off, agreed to go with Lansing. So who is John Lansing? John Lansing was described as a young, large, handsome person with remarkable fine regular features, eyes and complexion light, yet good powers of conversation, was dignified and kind in manner and of varied information. Another description said, though not possessed of shining talents, was nevertheless a man of good abilities and of good strict integrity. Lansing originally had an H on the end of it, L-A-N-S-I-N-G-H. It is Dutch, as in tulips and windmill Dutch. The family originally came from Heislip, then moved up north of Amsterdam, And S-I-N-G-H, the end of it, means son of. So the name actually means son of land, is what Lansing means. Eventually the family settled in the Hudson Valley around Albany. When John was born, he became an attorney, studying under Yates in New York City. When the Revolutionary War broke out, he became General Schuyler's military secretary. And Schuyler is described as a man whose patriotism was greater than his abilities. Schuyler, in 1777, was commander of the Army of the North. Well, the British had a plan to divide the colonies in two by coming down through New York, separating New England from the rest of the colonies. And there's a force of British coming down out of Canada, another force coming up from New York. And they're going to split New York. Schuyler was sitting with an army of several thousand men at Fort Edward, which was down from Fort Ticonderoga. The British came down, captured Ticonderoga, and Schuyler retreated. And he left his stores, didn't destroy his provisions, didn't destroy anything. The British captured him. So eventually the British were stopped around Saratoga. Schuyler was immediately relieved of command and court-martialed, and Lansing testified at his trial, at his court-martial. John Lansing was a family man. I'm not sure exactly how many children he had. Their accounts are varied, and I think because some of them had died and then they renamed the next, there was Sarah, like she died, and then they renamed 2 years later, according to another account, they had another Sarah. But approximately about 10 children. He was a state legislature in New York. He served in the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. I don't know what happened at the 8th session of the New York General Assembly. He was speaker for the last 2 sessions. He was a congressman. He served in 3 sessions of the Continental Congress representing New York. He was a negotiator. Once they were putting the country together, there was several conflicting land claims between the different states, and he served on a commission to settle the land claim between New York and Massachusetts, and New York and Vermont. He was mayor of Albany for 3 years. He was also the county coroner of Albany. He was a market clerk of Albany. He was a founding father. When the Constitutional Convention was called to draft the Constitution, he served with Yates and Alexander Hamilton from New York. But when the Constitutional Convention got going, he only served for about 6 weeks. He walked out, him and Yates. They were anti-federalists, thought the Constitution proposals they were considering were taking the rights away from the states, consolidating too much in the central government. So while Hamilton stayed as a Federalist, Yates and John Lansing walked out and did not sign. John Lansing also was a member of the New York Constitutional Convention, was called to ratify, and him and Yates and several others controlled that convention. It was basically made up of anti-federalists. Alexander Hamilton, through political maneuvering, got the convention recessed because it took 9 states to ratify the U.S. Constitution. They were afraid if New York went against it, that would be a signal to the rest of the states, and it would be a bad signal. So they actually rounded up the 9th state in June. I think it was New Hampshire was the 9th state to ratify. So at that point, it didn't make any difference what New York did. And they reconvened the next month and passed it by 3 votes, because it was basically meaningless. He was served as a judge on the New York Supreme Court, and later was a chief judge. He then moved over to a chancellor in New York, and that's where he gets his name, Chancellor Lansing. And that was a court of equity, property. He had a horrendous amount of control separating property disputes. And he served in that position until he was 60, and New York had a law at that point that nobody could serve in a judge or any prominent position if they were over 60 or over. So he had to resign as chancellor. So they had age discrimination. And he was nominated as governor of New York by the Republican Democrats. Again, it was anti-federalist in 1804. While he was serving as chancellor, he refused. He refused to serve, declined the nomination. He then served as a regent of the University of New York. He was presidential elector. He is an author, wrote a book on basically equity cases that came before the court. The book is over in the State Law Library. Very boring. I did read it. It's extraordinarily boring. In his later years in life, there was a township in New York. There's a large township. In 1817, they decided to divide up into 3 townships, and you got to recognize the name. There's Locke, Genoa, and Lansing, all of them right around this area. And they were basically honoring John Lansing for his service that he had done to the state of New York. In 1822, he was nominated to serve as postmaster of Albany. And Van Buren wrote a letter to the president nominating him, noting that nothing would be more grateful to the feelings of the people of our state than to see an old patriot thus provided for in the evening of his days. No Social Security. He did not get the appointment. His opponent was a general who served in not only the Revolutionary War, but 1812, and who was wounded. And basically they come back and said they're giving it to the guy that was wounded in service, not just somebody who served in service. So Lansing didn't get it. What happened to John Lansing? One of the most interesting parts, nobody knows what happened to him. Basically 170 years from this Friday night, he went to New York to visit Columbia University to transact some business. And I was there. He had dinner with his father-in-law in New York hotel, the hotel he was staying at. And it was a dark and stormy night. And he went out to post 2 letters to Albany. And the way they did it is there was boxes down along the Hudson where you put your letters and the steamships would stop, pick them up, and carry them up the river. So he went out to basically not mail, but deposit 2 letters. He was never heard received from since. Speculation is that he drowned in the river. His body was never recovered. So is it appropriate that Lansing is named after him? Here's a guy that was a founding father, served in the Revolutionary War, served in 2 out of the 3 branches of government, was nominated as governor of the other branch. I guess it is. The martial expounder noted, Lansing is after all perhaps an infamous, pleasing in sound, agreeable, and proper name is any that has been suggested. And I guess we can agree. Okay?
Wonderful.
Tape over?
Thank you.
Okay.